Section 4.6, Fractions and Decimals. The first type of problem you will see in this section looks like this. They want you to take a fraction and write it as a decimal. So what's important to remember is that a fraction, in this case 1/8, is equivalent to the division problem of 1 being divided by 8. The numerator gets divided by the denominator. But without a calculator, you're going to have to do this by hand, and so the key thing is to make sure you set up the division correctly. The number being divided, in this case the 1, is on the inside of the division box. The number doing the dividing, in this case the 8, is on the outside. Well, whenever you do this division, 1 is less than 8, and so it's going to require a decimal. So I'll go ahead and put a decimal point on here. Why is it doing that? Okay. I'm going to add some zeros. At this point, you can then place the decimal point in your answer, because there is no decimal in the divisor, so we don't have to move it. And now we do the division. Well, 8 does not go into 1, so that's a 0. 8 can go into 10 at most one time. 1 times 8 is 8. Subtract, I get a 2. And again, we're ignoring that decimal point at this point. Bring down the 0. 8 can go into 20 at most 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. Subtract, I get a 4, and if needed I can add as many zeros as I like. They have no value other than we need them to do the division. So bring down the 0. 8 can go into 40 exactly 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40, and there is no remainder. So the decimal equivalent of 1/8 is 0.125. Another quick example, 3/4. If we want to write it as a decimal, always read the instructions to make sure you understand what they want you to do. Means just go ahead and carry out the division. The 3 is the numerator, that is what is getting divided. The 4, the denominator, is doing the dividing. I'll go ahead and place a decimal point. I'll throw in some zeros, and we just do the division. 4 does not go into 3, and let me place my decimal point in the answer. 4 does not go into 3, so there's a 0. 4 can go into 30 at most 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. Bring down the 0. 4 can go into 20 exactly 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20, with no remainder. And so the equivalent as a decimal of 3/4 is 0.75. In the previous problems, our division terminated. In other words, we ultimately had no remainder left over. It will not be uncommon that you'll see a problem such as this, and it's very important that you notice that in this problem, underneath where you're going to write your answer, it's going to tell you to round to some place value. This is very important in how you carry out your division. Okay, so what you want to make sure you understand is when you have to round to a place value, you must do the division one place beyond the value you're rounding to. So in other words, if they want us to round to the 1000th, then we must round, or we must complete our division all the way to the 10,000th place. Okay? And that's going to be 4 decimal points. Remember that after the decimal, first value, and not just write a 1, is in the tenths. The 2 is in the hundredths. The 3 is in the thousandths, and the 4 is in the 10,000ths. So we must carry the division 4 places in order to correctly round to 3 places, or the thousandths. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the division. So 5 is getting divided by 9. Now in this case, since I know I have to take it to 4 decimal places, I'm going to go ahead and add 4 zeros. I'm going to use all of these in order to complete the division. I'll go ahead and place my decimal into my answer, and then just go ahead and proceed. 9 does not go into 5, so that's a 0. 9 can go into 50 exactly 5, or not exactly, approximately 5 times, or at most 5 times. 9 times 5 is 45. Do the subtraction, I get a 5, bring down the next 0. 9 can go into 50 at most 5 times. 9 times 5 is 45. Subtract, I get a 5. And you can see that a pattern has emerged, and this is not going to change. So I'll just go ahead and complete the division, but I know it's all going to be 5s. 9 times 5 is 45. Bring down this final 0, and once again do the division. Now at this point, even though I have a remainder, I'm going to stop because I know I have to round to the nearest thousandth. Okay, so notice my answer. Well, if I want to take this answer and round it to the nearest thousandth, you got to remember the rules. Well, this is the thousandth place, which means you got to evaluate the number to the right. Since it's a 5, the rule is if it's 5 or higher, you round up the value, the place value you're rounding to. So the correct answer for this problem will be 0.556. Okay? If you type in 0.555, it will be marked incorrect. So the rounding is essential to getting these problems correct. The next type of problem you'll have is to take a mixed number and write it as a decimal. So for example, 4 5/9 as a decimal, there's really 2 options to do this. That's why I wrote the problem down twice. Okay, so we'll take a look at option number 1, and it's my preferred method. It's a little bit easier. Okay, so let's just make sure we understand. A mixed number is really the same thing as 4 and 5/9. It's really an addition problem. Okay, well, I chose the 5/9 because we just did this problem, so this is equivalent. If you just did the division on the 5 over 9 like we did in the previous example, that would come out, and rounding it to the nearest thousandth as we did, it would be equal to 0.556, which means when we add the 4 and the decimal part, this is what we get. So what I've done basically is I know that my answer will contain a 4 to the left of the decimal, and then I only do the division on the fraction part, and that's what is the decimal value. Okay. Method number 2, and it's absolutely okay to do this, it just may require a little bit more work, is step 1 is you can go ahead and convert this into an improper fraction. So let's do that. So 9 times 4 is 36, plus 5 is 41. So as an improper fraction, it is this. Well, this is still a fraction, so we can go ahead and do the division. So the 41 is being divided by the 9. I will go ahead and place my decimal point. Since we have to round the answer to the nearest thousandth, I'll go ahead and put in 4 zeros to take it to 10,000th. And then we do the division. So I'll go ahead and place my decimal point and begin the division. Well, 9 can go into 41 at most 4 times. 4 times 9 is 36. Do the subtraction, I get a 5. Bring down the 0. And then we see we're going to have this process again of 9 going into 50 at most 5 times. 9 times 5 is 45. And it repeats exactly the same process that happened in the previous example. So when you do the division, you're going to end up with all 5s as we had before. which means when you round it to the nearest thousandth, you would write it as 4.556. You can see these are exactly the same answers. I submit that the second way to do it is a little bit more work. I think it's easier to just keep the whole number as it is to the left of the decimal and then do the fraction division only. And that's going to be your decimal answer. Another type of problem in this section will be to take a decimal and convert it into a fraction. So again, be careful to read the instructions so you know exactly what it is you're expected to do. Okay, well, there's a few steps to follow. The first thing you want to do is the number in the decimal portion is going to be the numerator of the fraction. So in this case, when I say the decimal portion, it's what is to the right of the decimal point. Well, here it's just an 8, so the 8 is going to be the numerator of the fraction. The place value of the last digit is the denominator. Well, the last digit is the 8. It's 1 to the right of the decimal, which means it's the 10th location. So that means the denominator will have that value of 10. And then last step is, like always, you simplify the fraction if you can. Well, 8 and 10 are both even, so I will go ahead and divide both the numerator and denominator by 2, which gives me a 4 over 5. That can't be reduced. This would be your final answer. Let's just do one more example. We're given this decimal and asked to write it as a fraction, so step 1 is to write the numerator. It's the decimal portion. In this case, 625. Denominator is the place value of the last digit. So it's this 5. Well, it's tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So our denominator will be 1,000. And the last step is go ahead and simplify it. Well, a couple of ways to simplify it, but most obvious should be that these numbers end in 5 and a 0. So we'll just go ahead and do the division by 5. And that will yield 125 over 200. I'm not going to show the division. I trust you're able to do that. Well, we see that they still end in 5 and 0, so we can go ahead and continue and divide both of these again by 5, which would give us 25 over 40. Well, once again, they end in 5 and 0, so we divide these both by 5 again. And then the final result, 25 divided by 5 is 5, 40 divided by 5 is 8. So the fraction in lowest form would be 5 over 8. The last type of problem in this section will be to arrange decimals in order, typically from smallest to largest. So let's just take a look how to do this. We want to take each of these decimals and write them so that they all have the same number of decimal places after the decimal point. That means we have to add some zeros. So 5.8, since the most number of decimal places after the decimal point is 4, I'm going to go ahead and add 3 zeros such that I have 4 places after the decimal. 5.79, I'll go ahead and add 2 zeros. 5.0079, I don't need any zeros here. And 5.804, and then just add 1 0. Okay, once you've done this, then you're basically going to look in each column for the smallest number, and that will be the smallest value. So all are 5, so it can't determine here, so I go to the next column. I have an 8, a 7, a 0, and an 8. Well, the 0 is the smallest value. That means that this decimal here is the smallest value given. So I'll go ahead and write that one first. That's my smallest. And then I can go ahead and just cross it out so I don't consider this one any further. Okay, well, let's go again. Well, we already know that they're all 5s. In the second column I have an 8, a 7, and an 8. Well, 7 is the smallest value, so this will be my next smallest number, 5.79. I don't have to write those zeros at the end. I just did that to make sure everything lined up. Now we have 5s again. We have 8 and an 8, so we have to continue. We have a 0 and a 0. Can't determine it here, so we go to the third column. I have a 0 and a 4. Well, 0 is smaller than 4, so this would be my next smallest number, 5.8, and I'm not going to write the trailing zeros. Okay, so it's gone. That only leaves me with one number remaining, and so that would be the largest. Okay, that concludes this section.